This is a simple finite element simulation of a steel plate, that is the green component in here, that is welded to a vertical upright plate through these idealized fillet welds at the base of the plate. I take and load that steel plate in tension as shown out here. Now, if we go back and look carefully at this plate, you will see that the way I attach the green plate to a vertical plate, you can't see the vertical plate, it's hidden here. I use these idealized triangles that create fillet welds, and this face of the weld is attached to the vertical plate, whereas the lower face down there is attached to the steel plate I am loading. And so there would be a deformation away from those welds, and I'll show you that here by enhancing the deformation scale. So you can see that there is a deformation. These are fixed. That's the fillet welds. I pull the plate perpendicular to the vertical upright, and the plate is trying to deform, but that deformation is resisted by these fillet welds, which transfer load from this face to this plate through shear stresses at the weld faces. The weld problem that I just discussed had a plate that was butted at 90 degrees against a second plate, as shown in this figure right here. This is a weld callout where the leg size of the fillet weld is 5 millimeters, and this is a right isosceles triangle. So it is these fillet welds right here that are holding plate 1 to plate 2. And in the example that we just gave, I show here the fillet welds. Just imagine removing them. We apply a load to this plate F off to the right, and we are transferring load from that plate, plate 1, to a vertical, plate 2, over here, through shear in the welds. So there's no doubt that I am using shear stress to counteract the applied force. That shear stress transfers over to the weldment, and the weldment transfers the force F over 2 to the plate to which it is welded. It is important to note that this is a free surface right here. Load transfer is occurring through shear. Now, you might argue that there is a normal stress here of F over 2 acting on the fillet weld, but we all know that metals yield in shear, and so the shear stress is the most important aspect of any failure theory that we would put together for weldments, and that is in fact what we are going to do. So once again, I want to show this weld. We have a load F applied to the plate, and we are transferring through shear in the weldment to the vertical plate. So on each side we have a shear patch that we are transferring load across. And the idea is that we want to calculate what that shear stress happens to be by taking the applied load and dividing it by a cross-sectional area. Well, what is the cross-sectional area? We know that we have a weld length L, and you know that we also have a specified weldment leg size of 5 millimeters. And so we would have the applied load divided by L times, well, I'm going to call that 5 millimeters, or I could also call that H. Let's go ahead and call it H because that's usually the way it is specified. And in this case, there are two such areas, one on the top side and one down on the bottom side. So that becomes our shear stress. Now, because welds are not perfect, we don't like to use the value H. Instead, we use a different value, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now let's imagine a butt joint where we have two plates, plate 1 and plate 2, welded together along a line that is perpendicular to the applied loads. Well, the normal stress that's acting across that weld is going to be the force F divided by the cross-sectional area of that weld. The weld is of length L, and we're going to use what's called the throat height H. That's what we talked about before for the depth of the fillet weld as well. So that's the tensile stress. If we loaded this joint in shear, the shear stress would be the same. That is, we take the force F that's applied to it and we divide it by, now we're going to call it the throat area. So we call the weld effective area the throat. And that's what we're going to do when we look at fillet welds. In fact, instead of using the legs H of the fillet weld to calculate shear stresses, we are going to use a throat dimension here, which is 0.707 times the weld leg size H. This is an example, simple example, where we have a load 2F applied to a plate where I have slapped a top plate and a bottom plate onto this central plate, and I've used fillet welds to hold it all together. So load is transferred across these weld legs as shear, and we idealize the weld geometry using these simple right isosceles triangles, and the throat area is going to be this side times the weld length. So the throat area is going to be equal to 0.707 HL. And why do we get 707? Well, this is a right isosceles triangle, so each of these angles is 45 degrees. And so this side right here is H times sine of 45 degrees. This throat distance is 0.707 times the weld leg size, H. So we are simplifying the stress, the shear stress, by dividing by an effective cross-sectional area that is smaller than the specified weld size. We do that because if we divide by a smaller cross-sectional area, it amplifies the effective shear stress and becomes a conservative estimate of the shear stresses. So load is transferred as shear, and that shear is calculated by dividing the applied load by the throat area. Why do we do this? We want to use this smaller effective cross-sectional area because welds never look perfect like this. They are in fact highly variable, and so we want a conservative estimate of the cross-sectional area. So the effective shear is the applied force divided by the throat area, and that throat area is smaller than the leg size associated with the specified weld. When we weld something, we change the base metal because we've heated it up quite a bit. And so there is a heat affected zone, the HAZ zone, which has locally different properties. So we have to be considerate of that as well when we're trying to figure out what is going to cause the weld to fail. So when we are applying a load, for instance, to this complicated geometry here, we could simply yield the plate, we could yield the weld, or we could shear this other plate right here. So there's lots of things that can go wrong and lots of things that we have to check when we're trying to design a weldment. So I already said this, the shear stress is calculated by dividing the applied load F by the effective throat area, 0.707 H, and this is the simple equation 9.3 from your textbook that we use to calculate that effective shear stress. So let's take a quick peek at a simple example. We have a force 2F applied to a plate 1, which is welded through fillets, the plates 2 and 3 here, and we have shear transfer across those fillets. What is the shear in the weld? Right, so what we do is we realize that each of these welds is going to carry half of this applied force. So the shear stress in the welds, its direct shear, is going to be equal to the force F divided by the throat area, which is 0.707 H times the weld length L. This is an example of direct shear, and the calculation of the shear stresses are very simple as a result of that. If you look at either of these fillet welds, you can see that if I three-dimensionalize those fillet welds, you can see that the load is transferred as shear stress. And we will then calculate the shear stress not using the dimension H, but instead using a reduced dimension, which is associated with the throat of the weld. So we're looking at this smaller cross-sectional area in order to calculate that shear stress. Now, what if the structure is loaded in bending and shear? So suppose we have a plate here, which is welded to a vertical plate here too. This plate is going to have some thickness T. Let's not worry about that right now. But we are going to end load this plate with a force F that's pushing it downward. How do we deal with the weld stresses? Well, what we know is that this force at the end of this cantilever is going to create a direct shear and a bending moment. So what we have to do is we have to figure out where the centroid of this weld group happens to be, because remember, we're trying to figure out the stresses in the welds. We want to find the centroid of these welds, and we want to transfer our load to that centroid. So if I move the load to the centroid, I'm going to have a force directed downward, and I'm going to have a moment or a torque. So I have a torque that's equal to the force times a moment arm, which I'll call L, and that moment arm L is the distance from the line of action of the force to the centroid of the weld group. So that's a key thing. We're trying to find the centroid of the weld group. And so it means that we're going to have two types of stresses acting on these welds. Let me get rid of some of this. It's a bit too busy in here. So there's no doubt that I'm going to have shear stresses from direct shear, which is associated with the force F acting vertically downward. So I will have shear stresses acting on the welds that are pointing downward like so. And we're going to evenly distribute those shear stresses across the overall weld area. The other thing that we are going to have is torsional stresses. So we're going to have torsional shear. I'm going to call that tau double prime, and we're going to have direct shear tau prime. And the direct shear is the force divided by the effective area of the weld group, while the torsional shear is going to be this torque T times R divided by the polar moment of inertia of the weld group. And that R is a measurement from the centroid to any location of interest in the weld group. Clearly, T, the torque, is going to be a constant. J is going to be a constant. So the further you are from the centroid, the higher the torsional shear stress is going to be. So it's very clear that it is the corners of these welds that are going to have the largest torsional shear stresses. So we want to find the distances to those corners, and then we need to figure out what that torsional shear stress is going to be. Now, the way we do that is pretty straightforward. We take that weld group and we go from that full pattern to a unit pattern representation as shown here, where we let the thickness of the weld go to 1. So we have a 1 unit leg size in the weld. And then we will introduce a unit polar moment of inertia for a thickness of 1. And if we know the true throat width is actually 0.707 times h, we simply multiply the unit polar moment of inertia by the true throat width, and that gives us the actual polar moment of inertia for the particular weld group. And so we are lucky in that Table 9.1 in the Shigley textbook lists weld areas and unit polar moments of inertia for various weld patterns. These are shown here, where we have a simple single fillet weld, that's 1. We have the double fillet weld, 2. This is the one we were just looking at. We have a 90-degree angle fillet weld, and the dimensions are shown in this table. And we have 6 different sort of weld groups that we can use. The best way to sort this out is to use an example from the Shigley textbook, where a handle bracket, shown here, is welded to a 200 U channel, shown here. And there are fillet welds that are placed up here, and there are fillet welds that are placed along the edges of the sample. So we have a fillet weld on the back side of this bracket that goes like that, and then down each side on the outside of the plate. So we have these internal fillet welds and these external fillet welds to attach this bracket to the U channel. We're applying a 50 kilonewton load at the center of the bracket. So we're going to assume that that load is equally shared between the two sides. Side 1 on the left here and side 2 on the right. And we're just going to look at one of those sides, and we're going to apply a 25 kilonewton load to that side at a distance of 100 millimeters above the top of the U channel. We have other dimensions, and that is the span of the bracket is 190 millimeters. The height of the U channel, 56 millimeters, and as was just mentioned, we are 100 millimeters above the top of the U channel, where we are applying a force of 25 kilonewtons to each side. Well, what we're going to do is understand that this force that's applied to this handle is going to have to be transferred to the centroid of the weld group, but we have to move it to the centroid, and as we do that, we're going to have both a direct shear force of 25 kilonewtons and a torque that's related to this distance 100 plus the centroidal distance below the top of the U channel. Well, we go to the tables 9.1 in Shigley, and see that there is a weld group that looks like the weld group of interest up here. The weld group is this particular group that I've drawn in blue. We're going to imagine it's of unit thickness, but we can calculate the area of that weld group rather easily using this equation right here if we know the B, the D, and the H. Well, we've already specified that H is 6 millimeters. We know that B is going to be the height of the weld. Well, that's 56 millimeters. And D is the width of the weld group. That's 190 millimeters. So we have everything we need to be able to calculate the area. We also have everything we need to be able to calculate the centroidal location. We know that the centroid will be located, the Y component of the centroid, given this diagram right here, is located at the geometric center of this inverted U-shape weld. But the X component is going to be below by a distance X bar, you'll see here, that's given by B squared over 2B plus D. So this X bar distance is 56 squared over twice 56 plus 190. And if we work that out, we will get about 10.4. So this is 10.4 millimeters below this top of the weld here. So what that means, since the centroid is 10.4 millimeters below, is that when we move this force of 25 kilonewtons to the centroid, our moment arm is 110.4 millimeters. So we now know that we have a force of 25 kilonewtons acting to the right, and we have a torque T, which is given by 25 kilonewtons times 110.4 millimeters. So we can easily calculate that torque. We can calculate this cross-sectional area. And this equation here gives us the unit polar moment of inertia. And so if we want the actual polar moment of inertia, we multiply this by 0.707 h times the unit polar moment of inertia, and that will give us our polar moment of inertia. So we use the equations in table 9.1 to calculate these things, and we find that the area of the weld group for leg sizes of 6 millimeters is 1280 square millimeters. This X bar is 10.4, the Y bar is 190 divided by 2, and the J is 7 times 10 to the 6 millimeters to the fourth. Our torque is the 25 kilonewtons times its moment arm. That's 2,760 Newton meters. So that means we have two types of shear acting. We have a direct shear, which is tau, and that is going to be the force of 25 kilonewtons. We're going to have to be careful about units, divided by the cross-sectional area here of 1280 millimeters squared. We're going to have to, like I said, be careful about units. And then we have a torsional shear, which is going to be T times R over J. And we know the T, we know the J, we just need to figure out what the R's happen to be. So we're just going to do this schematically right here. The direct shear, we have this 25 kilonewton load acting in this direction. It's going to generate a uniform shear stress everywhere in this weld cross section, and it's all going to be pointing to the right. But we also have a torsional shear, and I'm going to locate the corners, the central corners of these welds with radius vectors, and then we're going to imagine what that torsional shear stress happens to be. We know that it is going to be perpendicular to these moment arms. If it is rotating clockwise, I'm going to have a shear force that looks like that at A. I'm going to have a shear force that looks like that at B. I'm going to have a shear force that looks like this at C, and like that over here at D. So we don't know the magnitudes of these moment arms yet, these R values, so we don't know the actual magnitudes of these torsional shear stresses, all of which can be different because they all have different radius values. Well, I know that D is going to be the same as A and C is going to be the same as B, but I don't know how B compares to A, for instance. You look at that and you say, let me save myself a little bit of time, because this torsional shear stress at A is going to have a component that points in the negative direction, negative x direction. The component points in the negative y. The component at B is going to have a component that points in the positive x, which is going to add to the direct shear term. And then I have a negative y. At C, we're going to have a component that points in the direction of the direct shear. So at C and at B, we're going to have some addition going on, whereas at D and at A, we are subtracting the x component of the shear force from the direct shear. And so your first guess is our high stresses are going to be at C and B. And so you find the radius distance, which you can get for all of those. It's just simple geometry. And you calculate what the shear stresses are. And then you add up the shear stresses in components, and then you find the net shear that would be acting. So that's how you solve these welding type problems. And then you compare that shear stress to the shear yield strength for the weld. And you also look at the shear yield strength of the base metal to see whether or not you're going to have shear failure in the weld group.